Hello, good afternoon, everybody. It is HR Fest Online, and today, in this special session, our guest is SESIL PIR. Hi, Cecil.
Hello.
Nice to have you.
Thank
Cecil,
you. Thank you for having me.
it's always a pleasure because you have been already on the HR Fest stage, so you are a part of a selected elite.
Yeah.
Cecil, you are a psychologist, you have been an HR executive, an entrepreneur, and now you are the founder and CEO of SESIL PIR Consulting GmbH. So you're
right.
funny.
Yes, correct.
And what we are now going to talk about is basically it's summarized in your article in the Forbes. I've read that, and I had two opinions.
Okay.
My right brain said, "Oh, that's a wonderful word. I think it's going to turn out like that." And my left brain said, "Oh my God, that's never going to happen. People are just not like that."
That's so funny. You know, I received, so I started writing on Forbes a little over a year ago. I'm a new writer. And eventually, at first, people didn't know me. Eventually, people started reading my articles. And now I actually get a lot of feedback, sometimes feedback that I don't even endorse. So, but a lot of people tell me that there's a harmony between the right and left brain in my articles. So I take it as a compliment, actually, nowadays. So,
so please, a bit tell us how you see the future, how these 2 months affect the future, and what can we use from these 2 months to gain as an advantage?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. Thank you for prosing. I feel like we have been, as a business community, we have been in sight of an evolution for the last 10 years or so to begin with. So we've been talking about drivers for change. We have been talking about fourth industrial revolution and why organizations need to transform. But we couldn't get a lot of people on board because, you know, they have their day-to-day agendas and they have their operations running. So it was like the future of work concept was a misnomer. And I think this COVID environment did something for us. It's become sort of an accelerator, if you will, because all of a sudden, everybody is working from home. All of a sudden, we are needing to rethink our economic and our actually organizational models. And all of a sudden, we have to do learning online, for example. We have to, you know, go into the digital space. So things have really changed or changing now, and I think it's starting to make sense for people. But in the bigger picture, I feel like we may want to start thinking about some of our taxonomy in the business community. And one of the key definitions I believe needs redesign is the concept of growth. The current definition that we have, that we hold for growth, introduces a number of individual, collective, and systemic issues for us. You know, when we think about growth today in a business sense, it's exponential growth. You know, year over year, we have growing KPIs. Year over year, we have, even from a government perspective, growing GDPs, etc. But I don't think we understand what growth is. And if we look at growth from a scientific lens, you know, what happens at the biology level, for example, or what happens from a historic view, from, you know, how we went into civilization and how our cultures developed, we rarely see exponential growth. So maybe I can offer a bit in that definition. So growth is defined as sort of a regenerative process. It supports ongoing development, that's for sure, but there's progression and transcendence at its core. And it's visible, it's measurable, and it's holistic throughout its journey. So whether it's for a living organism or an artifact, the concept of growth actually aims to serve the livelihood of its constituents, and it actually increases and it enhances the quality of life. while it's providing a possibility of ongoing change. So it's a bit of a complex concept, but over the centuries, we haven't really understood what growth means. And therefore, if we consider an individual, for example, say, you know, my friend Tom, for me to consider my friend Tom a successful one, he needs to have a certain status inside of an organization. He needs to have a certain title or a particular income, right? This is how we judge the individual and his growth. And same for organizations. When we look at business, the way we think about a business being successful is only if they have a perceived position or a brand, or they're showing, you know, year over year, you know, economic development. Then we say, oh yeah, that's a growing company. So there's this expectation around constant exponential growth that's both unrealistic and unattainable at the same time. So this would be one concept that I would love for us to revisit and redesign.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a bit like growth versus progress.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so if I were to give you an example, for example, well, there are many, but you know, the country of China, where the virus came from, let's just pick that up for an example. So China is one geography that's been reported as sort of a fastest growing economy in the past 30 years. So everyone is talking about China. But when we ask the question of really, is there a growth in a successful manner there? It's a question mark for me, because if you know enough about China's economic modeling, and I do a ton of work, both in China, but also with organizations that have operations in China, their model is heavily dependent on exports. And to make that model a successful one, the government often agrees on a number of companies coming and building on its soil. So they have operations on China, and often with no environmental limitations, or there's no consideration of terms and conditions in terms of employment. So what ends up happening, a Western company comes and builds on the soil of China. They don't care at all about what's happening in the community there, or what sort of environmental impact they may be having on that landscape. Also, they may be paying their workers, let's say in Europe, $100,000 in annual salary, but they can pay their workers in China $1 a day. That's like 12,000, you know, roughly speaking, 1/10 of their peers' salary. So they're causing actually dissonance in the system. Of course, China, again, is just one example. There are many other governments and businesses that have sort of a skewed economic model, if you will.
So you think, if I understand right, it's the problem of the model, the economic model, and the question is there an alternative one?
We would love to have an alternative one. So many of us, I think, want to have definitely different economic models. That's for sure. But it doesn't really end there, and I'll get to that in a second. But the current economic model that we have, both at a government level or a business, by the way, I always say organizational level, because a government is an organization, a business is an organization, a family is an organization. These are just different types of organizations. But the economic modeling we have for organizations is built on this assumption that there is a perfect competition concept there. This is sort of a theoretical structure that's, when a certain criteria is met, people are satisfied. It's sort of the assumption. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So the perfect competition concept has an underlying assumption that people always are motivated through self-interest, and they will always have a need for a new commodity. It's like human beings are hungry. You can give them anything you want. And so the assumption says, if we create the perfect market conditions and with the right sort of incentives, people will always buy, and therefore we can have new job families, and we can have new employment opportunities, we can have new companies. It's like give. This is the system. And this is a sort of a flawed flow, because it takes a skewed view on human beings' core motivations. So as an IO psychologist, I can talk about psychology forever, but just to keep it short, human beings have three primary motivations. One of them is self-interest. This is true. We want to have a level of autonomy in what we do, but there's also a need for bonding. We have a very deep need for connection, connecting with others that are like us and connecting to the environment. That's the second motivation. And there's a third motivation that we have, which is we want to be a part of something meaningful. So we want to serve and contribute to a broader mission. And so in a way, the system that we have is only playing to one side of us. It's not a holistic view into what makes us act or behave in a particular way. So this, for me, is a very skewed view. There's something else about the current economical model that I tend to have a challenge with. This idea of competition, I find it a poisonous one. And people will argue me for this. They will say, you know, there's a friendly competition. Competition by definition means someone has less and someone has more. So there's a ranking in order. And it actually feeds into our mindsets, this concept of scarcity and control and efficiency. And though these are important values, I believe in balance as a value. So there's a need for scarcity mindset. There's a need for abundance mindset, which is the opposite. There's a need for controlling mindset. There's a need for caring mindset. They're again opposites. But if you're always playing in one mindset, if you're always in scarcity mindset, always in control, this actually introduces and navigates a set of detrimental behaviors, not only on behalf of the individual, but also for the collective. So again, I'm challenging a little bit the economical model here, but I am not an economist, and these models we have were built back in the first industrial revolution days by the economists and by the, what I call the holding capital, you know, people who held capital. And so they do put profit over anything else, but again, I challenge that.
Okay, I'm not going to challenge you back.
You can.
Although sometimes I have to, but let's go into another direction. This change in I don't know, in mindset, it's not going to happen in a day. So the whole world is not going to change. So we have to do step by step. And now those who are listening to us are HR professionals and decision makers in the Hungarian market. So what do you say to them? How can they do the first small steps in their organization?
Yeah, it's a really good question also. So as I said, I do believe we need to design a different sort of economic, social, and cultural models. And you know, from a business perspective, UN and World Economic Forum have been working to get CEOs' attention so they can think about sustainable goals for several years now. I think these are important conversations that have to continue. I also think we need to shift from volume-based metrics to value-based metrics. So when it comes to economic growth for a government, for example, we rely heavily on industrial outputs like GDP, disposable income, exports, but we never consider the quality of life, you know, whether people have access to health, whether they have access to good education or their life expectancy, etc. Similar in the business, when we look at our business KPIs, there's often no unified consideration for equity, for impact on the nature, the climate, the environment, none of that. Also, no consideration for human dignity or our sustained emotional well-being. So I love my field of HR. I love my field in organizational development, but I think we need to step it up a little bit. And these are not the times to serve business as is. These are the times to really consider what the future could potentially look like. And this is not a one-man show, I have to say that. So a single individual can't make it happen, but as an HR community, if we come together, we may be able to influence the CEO and other communities. And it requires us to take a bit of risk. That's all I can say. And it's, it's not a nice to have. I will underline that. It's a must have. Not only we are moving into a relationship focus in our economies, but also I want us to remember and not forget that we knew we would have a pandemic coming. We knew 20 years ago. No one invested money in this, and look where we are. And you know what? We also know today that we will have a shortage of water coming up soon. We know that there will be other climate issues, but you know what? More likely for me, there are data issues, data privacy issues, because a lot of the technologies are moving in the ways that we don't necessarily want to see, and there's no regulation in place. So today it's a pandemic, tomorrow it's going to be another issue. So we have to care. I don't think we have an option here. There has to be a different sort of response to what's happening in the environment. So I'm with my colleagues. I'm supporting them and cheering them to step up and speak up.
I love your enthusiasm, and of course these are very, very important values. Mm-hmm. The question is, we had many discussions on HR Fest online already. What will the crisis bring? Not so much COVID, more the economic crisis, because the economic crisis means that all the companies will have to face in the coming half a year, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, we don't know, but in the coming few years, we will face not the word of abundance, but the word of shortages. All the companies will be short of cash, short of growth, which might not be such a bad thing as to say, but short of opportunities. So some of the guys we talked to said that it's the reverse what is going to happen. Companies will cut spending on these nice to have, they say nice to have values. I am playing the devil's advocate. Because somebody said in a discussion, it was so interesting that maybe employer branding, the best employer branding proposition will be, we pay your wages every month. So it's shifting priorities. So how do you see that? That's an interesting thing.
It is. I think it's about how we relate to ecosystem, and it goes back to the growth conversation, because when we study, again, living organisms or societies in terms of how they have developed over the years, there's a relationship with the ecosystem there. And it makes perfect sense, because for any life or substance to develop, to make room for growth, it actually needs to expand in metabolism and in capacity. And so we have to think about our systems, our organizations in that way. What do we have today? What will we need tomorrow? And how do we bridge that gap? So you have to sort of take an almost holistic view on the ecosystem at large and see where are you going to play your different resources and what makes sense. And you know what? It may be that you end up with a bulk of Legos here and you're unsure what's going to happen here. Life will figure itself out. That's part of the reality here. But I think we need to take a more holistic view into the organizations. That would be my proposition.
We certainly share that hope, I would say. The day I read your article, I went with my small 6-year-old daughter biking in the forest, and we saw a tree, a beautiful tree, but a large tree in the middle of the forest. And my first thought was, oh, what a great big tree, it was majestic. But then I started thinking along your lines, and it couldn't grow forever. And it was big, but it was nicely in harmony with the surrounding other vegetation, and maybe that's something we need to aim
I love that. I love that example. There are two things that come to my mind. One of them is, you know, one of the most, the longest living organisms in the world is something called moss. It's the green moss that we see inside forests. And if you look into their behaviors, they're so interesting what they do. So because they're very connected like this, you know, if you look at them on surface, it looks like grass, one piece, but they're not, they're separate individual organisms. But what happens is if they see on another part of the surface, if the moss is going weak or mold, they cut their own water sources and start giving channels to their neighbors, because they understand if everyone is doing better, then the ecosystem is stronger and they'll be stronger individually. We, on the opposite hand, human beings, we look at the landscape and we see, okay, I have this piece, how can I have this piece, and this piece too? So instead of actually making channels to grow together, we cut each other's legs out. It makes absolutely no sense. The other thing that came to my mind is we have a culture model that's a tree. It's like you have a seed and then it grows into these branches. And one of the branches indeed is people. There are 5 P's. There's people, purpose, some other things. But profit isn't there. And someone recently challenged me. It was a vice president of finance in some firm. And he was like, well, where's the profit? I said, profit is your outcome, just as productivity. You know, you have to invest in these things to have what you're looking for, but you can't have that be at the center, because then you're putting everything else at the expense of your profit. It's not feasible. So anyway, it was an interesting conversation. So 2 things just came to my mind.
It's really interesting. It's great to listen to you. What I was thinking throughout the discussion is that probably you are right. Probably you're right on the long term. Question is, are you right on the short term? Can we make humanity think like that? That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm certainly trying every day. Just today I spend all of my morning and afternoon with one large pharmaceutical, similar situation. You know, all of their commercial people are on the lines because they can't be out and selling, and we're trying to engage them and reskill them, but it's very likely that they're going to have to potentially think about layoffs, and it's a reality. That's just the truth. But we are trying to at least be planful and be compassionate in the process, right? So yeah, I'm trying every day with different clients. That's all I can say.
That's nice. At least you are trying. And I think that's probably the message we can bring back to the HR decision makers who are listening, that if you try, basically that's what you can do.
Yeah, I love that. You know, we do have a choice. A lot of the times people feel like they don't have a choice. You do have a choice. You know, I've been in the front line of very difficult decisions, both as an executive when I was inside companies, and now as a consultant. I have to, you know, walk by my clients, but it's really a lot about how. No one thanks you if you have to lay them off, don't get me wrong, but there is a compassionate way in which you can lead the process and people understand the circumstances. And if you do right by the people, they go off to better and better things. So yes, we do have a choice. I genuinely believe we do.
Yeah, that's the perfect last line.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Thank you
very much. Maybe we should revisit it in a year to see where we got, or every year.
Interesting. For sure.
I hope we will see you in person soon in one of the HR Fest events, because that means that we are already able to organize physical events.
Yeah, come together again.
Yeah. And in the meantime, have a great time, and thank you for doing what you do.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing what you do.
Thanks a lot. All right, so take care and talk to you hopefully soon.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.